Well. Welcome back to the Electric Vibe podcast. I'm your man, Harlan Hucky Austin, here with my brothers, Kurt Hoffman and J David Silva. This week, we have an incredible guest, and we're going to continue to talk about the Sign of the Times movie release that we have been sharing for the last couple episodes. Jay, without further ado, could you introduce our guest today?
Yes. It would be my pleasure to introduce to the Electric Vibe podcast, John McKie. And we're happy to have John. John is a former editor of UK music magazine Smash Hits and Q. He's also written for various national newspapers over the years. John also penned a feature about how Prince made his legendary album, Sign of the Times, for its 30th anniversary back in 2017. Now, these experiences inspired John to write his first book called Prince, A Sign of the Times. And it is a fascinating telling of Prince's life, and it does a fantastic and unique narrative through the lens of the Sign of the Times project. It is our distinct pleasure to welcome John McKie to the Electric Vibe podcast. John, how do we find you today?
Well, all the better for meeting you fine gentlemen. It's great to be here.
It's our pleasure. So thank you for taking some time today. We've had a lot of podcast episodes and a lot of discussion over the past few months about Prince and Sign of the Times, because there was the theatrical release and IMAX. And that obviously led to more discussions about the life and the career and the project itself. So it's very, very fortuitous that you are here with us today. Before we start talking about the book and the project, John, can you just take us a little bit through your history, how you became a writer, and, what brought us to this point about your first book?
Of course, absolute pleasure. I started writing by accident at university. I joined the student newspaper and I started doing music reviews, and I loved it. And this would have been about 5 years after I was a serious Prince fan. So I remember writing features about Prince even for Glasgow University magazine and just saying, this man is incredible. He's just so underrated. And it's funny to talk about a megastar being underrated. But, I think it was a Jimmy Jam that said, however good you think Prince is, he's better. It's just digging into Prince and writing about him made me do that. And then I was lucky enough, as you say, to edit a couple of music magazines. I wrote about music for a lot of newspapers. And then I kind of fell into the charity sector almost by accident 22 years ago. I've been working there since, but I never really lost my love for music. And as you suggest, in 2017, for the 30th anniversary of Sign of the Times, I wrote a feature for the BBC. And I interviewed all sorts of interesting people. I interviewed people that were around at the time. I interviewed people that were fans of Prince's. I interviewed people like T-Boz from TLC that had covered If I Was Your Girlfriend. And I interviewed people that were there at the end of Prince's life and people that were there at the start. And what struck me was, even from this brief feature where I spoke to something like 7 or 8 people, 2 things happened. One thing was that I thought there's more to this story. I thought, this is a book. I thought, how do you explain this talented individual who says goodbye to the band that he's had his most success with, says goodbye to the first woman that he lived with, and then from the wreckage of, like, if you like that, the personal wreckage, although Prince didn't really deal in personal wreckage, did he? He just moved on quickly. But from that, he creates this masterpiece. And I thought there is a book in this, and this was 2017, but I had major imposter syndrome, I think, because I had been out the game, if you want to call it that. I had been out in music writing, and I thought, maybe I'm not the person to write it. Maybe this story's better told by somebody else. But 2020, it's actually, if you don't mind me sharing a personal story, my father passed away, and it was very sad, obviously, as anyone who's close to a father would have that feeling. But I remember sitting on his deathbed, and it was, he died at home surrounded by his family, which was, we were blessed to have that experience, really, if I can put it like that. But I just had this voice in my head saying, that book idea that you had 3 years ago, you should write that book. And, I don't know if you believe in the universe or spiritual voices or whatever, but there was just a very strong voice in my head going, you should write that book. I kind of thought, well, yeah, maybe I should. And then this was March 2020. So you can imagine this was before something rather big happened in the world. Something rather big happened in the world where lots of people were at home, where I was furloughed from work. So I interviewed something like 30 or 40 people, and a couple of things happened. I thought, well, I've gone too far now not to write the book, so I better finish it. Something else happened, which was, as I said, I'd interviewed something like 30 people, and I thought, I don't know this guy. I still don't know how he made this record, and I still don't know who he was. And I thought, I need to work harder. What do we all know about Prince? We know lots of things about Prince. We know he's talented. We know he could dance and play umpteen instruments. But I think before you look at anything with Prince, you have to look at these 2 4-letter words, hard work. And so I thought, well, one thing we know about Prince was he worked incredibly hard. So the least I can do in this book is make a bit of an effort. So 30 interviews turned into 50 interviews, turned into 100 interviews, turned into 200 interviews. And it was only when friends said, oh, okay, enough already. So I kind of stopped at 220. And, there were certain people that I'd love to have had in the book that, I mean, through absolutely there's no problem and it's their choice, but I, clearly didn't want to be interviewed. So at some point okay, I'll use interviews they've done or I'll deal without them. And here we are. And the other thing about Prince, and do interrupt me because I can talk about Prince as I guess all you guys can at length, is I really wanted to write a book that was different about Prince. And I hope if you're a Prince fan that this book appeals to you, because for me, there's 2 different kinds of music books generally. There's one book where the writer, quite often a big name writer, will go, let me tell you what's brilliant about Bob Dylan or David Bowie or the Beatles. They're the guys that seem to have most of the books written about them. And let me tell you let me give you my opinion. This album's brilliant and people don't understand this record. And he's brilliant as a bass player, Paul McCartney, and people don't understand this. And they're giving their opinion a lot. And the other one is the conventional biography, is, Paul McCartney's sister tells you the lane that he grew up in. And then Paul McCartney's producer with Wings tells you about what he did in the 1970s. And they build a narrative which is very chronological about somebody's life. And Prince has had books about that written before. And I thought, I want to try and do something different. And I think even the people that maybe don't like the book or it leaves them cold, it was like, I'd hope they would admit that the book is different about Prince. This book about Prince it doesn't just talk about his life. It talks about what his favorite color was. It talks about how he smelled. It talks about what he was like as a boss, but it also talks about other people's experiences with him. So something like Sign of the Times is very interesting to go, oh, Prince wants to make a triple album. Warner Brothers, what a bunch of Philistines. Why couldn't they understand? But I tried to write it from the point of view of like, well, Sign of the Times ended up as a double because, Lenny Waronker at the label talked him into it. So we tell us the book, wasn't it better as a double? Maybe Warner Brothers at a point. And of course, it's also maybe Prince didn't see, I think, his career moves as mistakes, but the fact that Sign of the Times, the movie, he refused to have it released in the summer, which is when most of the concert movies are released. Once Warner Brothers, the movie division, didn't release it, he just rush released it himself, and it was maybe buried a little bit and maybe didn't get the respect to the credit that it deserved. So for me, I was looking at other areas of Prince's career, not just assuming that he always did the right thing,
Right. And if I could just mention, John, the book was just published on September the 18th.
That's correct,
yeah. And it was, I might say this wrong, Bonnier Blink was the publisher, and it is available in the UK, right? And it is available now for purchase. So hopefully, as we move forward, people are going to buy it. We've had an opportunity to read it and review it, and it is really is very, very comprehensive and very thorough. Kurt?
So what have you learned in your journey towards completing this book, and how did it change your perspective on Prince? You were kind of giving us a little bit of that, earlier on, saying, who is Prince? So all the mining that you did, had that changed your perspective on who he was compared to where you found yourself understanding him initially?
I think when you write a book about anyone, you want to be fair. When he was maybe unkind or cruel to people, I didn't want to shy away from that. But I came away from it liking him more, came away finding, I think, a gentleness with the way that he was with people. And I don't know if Hucky can speak to that, having worked with him. But I came away from a sense that he really did sort of take care of the people that he worked with, but he was obviously a hard taskmaster too. I came away from it just with admiration for just how much he gave to people creatively. Because I think you've got a lot of fans going, why is the stuff in the vault not out? But
number one complaint.
It's a whole other ball of wax, I guess, as you guys in America say. But for me, it was like, how prodigious he was. The fact that he didn't just give us Prince, he gave us the time, he gave us Vanity 6 because he was making those records. He gave us the family to, look at your excellent T-shirt. I see it. Yeah, full respect. But also just how productive he was. So the book tells the story predominantly of Prince through the prism of 1987, but you can't get to 1987 without dealing with Under the Cherry Moon, and you can't deal with Under the Cherry Moon without dealing with the success of Purple Rain, and you can't deal with the success of Purple Rain without understanding that that's been funded by the Triple Threat Tour initially before Warner Brothers step in and pay for the movie. And then you can't understand the ambition behind the Triple Threat tour without understanding some of the setbacks he's had earlier. So things like the Rolling Stones being booed off stage in the Coliseum becomes an important part of the story. Then before then, Dirty Mind, the reset of Dirty Mind that basically took him into a different area of respect and fandom. And the first two records, him sort of pushing hard for it to record them on his own, and that fearlessness. And then you go back to his parents and the treatment there. And then once you've done all that, and you've told the story of Purple, you've told the story, I beg your pardon, of Sign of the Times. And as you guys know, having read the book, there's 16 chapters and it's the 16 songs of Sign of the Times. And so what I wanted to do with each of these 16 songs was almost understand a little bit of his personality. So I think one of the chapters, I Never Take the Place of Your Man, obviously that's known for his great guitar solo, and you can hear Santana in there. So then that talks about Prince on the guitar, talks about Prince's favorite guitarists. It talks about the guitars that you like to use. It then talks about, where and how he got the Cloud guitar. It talks about the Hohner Telecaster that you see around his neck in the George Harrison tribute. And then, of course, if you're going to tell the story about Prince and guitars, I was only going to write this big once. So it's like, okay, well, let's tell the story about the George Harrison solo. So I've spoken to most of the musicians that were on stage with him, with a few exceptions, and that's a great story. And then somebody also tells you the story about how he broke Kirk Douglas of the Roots guitar. Do you know that story? And that story's in the book, and that's an incredible story. That's an incredible story too. So you just, every time you think you've uncovered a part of Prince, you find another one. And that's why you guys are doing this podcast, because it's this guy's story, this individual story is richer and deeper than any of us understood while he was alive.
Absolutely.
John, first of all, it's good speaking with you again. When did we do our interview?
2020, I think, very early. Yeah, very early in the process. Yeah.
And here we are 5 years later. It's just, it's really amazing how time flies. I want to talk to you about what made you finally get past. You talked about imposter syndrome, and that's something that I can kind of relate to a little bit. I like to think of myself as a recovering perfectionist. And so I'm working on a book myself. And it's, for me, John, it's just like, it's been ready to go for quite some time now, but there's always something that says, you know what? It's not quite right yet. I need to make this change, or I need to meet this. And I find myself constantly revisiting and going back through chapters and saying, I need to rewrite it. And maybe that sounds better. But I feel like a lot of that is because I just have to get to the point and say, hey, you know what? This is good enough, and I'm going to put it out there. I'm curious, did you ever have those type of feelings when you were working on your manuscript?
Yeah, all the time. And I still think that there are, don't tell anyone, but there's things in the book that I'd now like to change. But, as I said, this has been recorded, so we're fine, aren't we? But
the whole world knows now, buddy.
But that's the nature of the creative process, I think. And if it helps you, Hucky, you can channel Prince, because, one of the things that the book deals with in great detail is that Susan Rogers told me this, and I loved that she said this. It was very perceptive, I thought, is he was the opposite of a perfectionist. So Michael Jackson would record hit songs and actually want to go back and re-record them. These are hits, and he still wants to re-record them. He would spend months agonizing over the hand claps. Prince would go into the studio in the morning, and you know this, and he would finish a track, maybe more than that, by the end of the day. Sign of the Times is the perfect example of how the creative person uses a quote-unquote mistake and makes something from it. So the backing vocals in Forever in My Life were not meant to be like that, I think, and he took the opportunity to make it sound like that. The sound that you hear in the Ballad of Dorothy Parker was due to Susan Rogers on the console. There was a dullness there, but that's part of what makes it special. And he said something like, it sounds kind of cool, and then left. And for me, I think one of the things that makes the book different, and I guess I'm here to sell it, but is that there's a lot of music biographies, and they sort of say, did you know that Prince liked James Brown, or did you know that Prince liked Sly Stone? And what I wanted to do really was sort of dig a bit deeper and say, okay, so there's interviews with people that have worked with James Brown, there's interviews with people that have worked with Sly Stone. I've read books on both of them before I wrote this, and I think, as I said to you earlier, I wanted to look at the perspective not just of Prince, but the people around Prince. And, so asking people who played with Prince what kind of a band leader he was is interesting, and that's your meat and potatoes of music biography. But it felt kind of different to sort of go, okay, well, What was it like for if you played in a band with Miles Davis? You know, so somebody said he would do experiments, he would do things like he would say to them, why don't we all try playing really quietly and see what that sounds like? Or he would be really welcoming when they started, but then he would be really tough on them once they settled in. Whereas I think Prince was kind of tough on them when they started. You know, what was it like in the studio with Stevie Wonder? And Stevie Wonder, as far as I can make out, and I hope I'm not wrong about this, but Prince would play the drums first. Stevie Wonder would put the drums on last. You know, Prince would record the vocals famously on his own with privacy and to have that intimacy because he was self-conscious about his singing, and he had been since he was a child, which is why, again, when you write a book, you've got to go way back to the source to understand, you know, what it was like when he made Sign of the Times. Stevie apparently liked people in the studio when he was singing so he could react off the vocals. So these are two great band leaders, two great world-class musicians, but even there you see the differences, and it's interesting to see that rather than just going, oh, did you know Prince was a bit like Stevie Wonder? They both played lots of instruments and did lots of classic records. And it's kind of like, it's good to be able to just dig into that and go, well, yeah, but Stevie was different from Prince. And, you know, Prince was different from James Brown. And Prince loved Joni Mitchell because of certain reasons. And Prince related to Joni Mitchell for certain reasons, but they were different in different ways. And, you know, looking at the commonalities, but looking at the differences for me was, I loved doing that. I had a lot of fun doing that.
You know, I'd like to ask one other thing, or say one other thing. You talked about hard work, and I've had an opportunity to be in the studio with some of the greatest musicians ever. And I remember Stevie Nicks one time talking about, she's like, he's just like a machine. He is amazing on how he can be focused on getting a project done and then giving all of himself to get it completed. And I can just talk about that work ethic. You know, I think about all the tours that I was with him, and, you know, certainly there were times where he was sick. He wasn't feeling well, but he continued to go out there and perform at such a high level and giving the fans, you know, what they came there for. And I often tell people there's two people in my adult life that I learned my work ethic from, and Prince was one of them, and my father was the other. But just the drive that he had, you know, and it's no secret that he never slept, but, you know, he was working, he was so focused on creating the next masterpiece. And like I said, a lot of that just goes back to his work ethic, and it, you know, to see someone, you know, like that and to be a part of that was just amazing. I stepped on your next comment there, Jay, so I apologize, but I wanted to get that out before I forget.
And it's actually a great natural segue because, John, I believe that you told us that you had seen Prince in concert 8 times.
I wish it had been 80, but yeah.
So is there, so it's a 2-part question. Is there one performance that stands out for you? And how did that translate into you writing the book? What experiences did you draw from seeing him live as you were writing the book? Was there any influence there?
I think you see Prince live and you see someone that was the greatest ever to do it. You're getting something from a Prince concert you're not getting from anywhere else. I mean, I never saw James Brown back in the day. I'd love to have. But even there, you know, James Brown wasn't playing a guitar solo. James Brown wasn't switching to the keyboards or, you know, playing the bass in Ugg boots, furry boots. Prince was Quicksilver, you know, and I saw him. I was lucky enough to see him in 3 different stages of his career. And the first tour I saw was the New Tour, where myself and my friend Douglas from Glasgow, who's, you know, it was nice because he came to the book launch the other week, which is a nice full circle moment. We were talking about Prince. A coach from Glasgow to Birmingham to see the New Tour at the NEC, as Sign of the Times fans will know, it's where he rehearsed with a band to get them to shape for the Sign of the Times tour. So it was the same venue. So that there's a nice kind of sign link. And then the last time I saw him was at the Roundhouse in Camden in London, which is a kind of very famous music venue. It was something like 5:30. He did 2 shows that day, and I saw him the first show. And I'd seen him in Leeds on the same tour, the Hit and Run tour with Third Eye Girl. He wasn't great. I think he was struggling that night. I think he wasn't well. He was maybe just a bit out of sorts. Even then, he's still Prince. He's still great. But you know, so I was trepidatious, if that's the right word, when I saw him at the Roundhouse, and he was unbelievable. Maybe the best I've ever seen him. And just, you know, he did a 20-minute version of Purple Rain that was like a prayer, like an incantation. I think what made me write the book was trying to understand him, you know, and it as you know, we said earlier, however good you think Prince is, he's better, and just trying to find out the stories. But you know, when I wrote that feature about Sign of the Times, a lot of people were very complimentary, and they went, "Oh yeah, that was a cool feature, man." And I say that not to, you know, big myself up, but I say that because for me, I felt like I hadn't got close to the man. I hadn't got close to why he made that record. So, you know, 220 interviews and 5.5 years later, I feel I'm a bit closer. I feel like I can have a conversation with you without hopefully making a fool of myself. But you know, you do think when you write a book of this sort, you do think, am I qualified to tell the story? So when Hucky asked about imposter syndrome, there was a point. You know, this is a great black musical superhero. I'm obviously skinny guy from Glasgow. I've not been in the music press for some time. I think you guys could all write a great Prince book. You know, and Hucky has clearly written a great Prince book. He just needs to get it out there. But I think Prince is big and broad enough that we can all have a different take. And you know, a lot of the people I tried to interview, they were like, "Oh no, I want to write a book," and I'm like, "Well, yeah, you can write a book and still talk to me. There's enough room here.
Sure.
You know, there's enough room for us all to talk about." I think I just wanted to write something that was I've written the book that I wanted to write, put it that way. You know, it talked about Prince and Sly Stone. It talks about how Prince smelt. It talks about the windmill in his back garden that I was fascinated by. It talks about his relationship with women. It talks about how the order of how he made a track in the studio. You know, so he would come in on the drum machine and the drum and, you know, do it methodically. And he was playing the guitar with his left hand and the keyboard with his right hand, or I think it was the other way around. I can't remember, but just, he was one of a kind. And, you know, the danger is that young people who think that music began with Britney Spears and ended with Sabrina Carpenter, and there's nothing wrong with both of those two, but, you know, just don't miss out on what a special talent Prince was and what a singular and fearless talent he was.
I don't often quote Gene Simmons. Gene Simmons is an incredibly intelligent human being. When Prince passed, one of the first interviews I saw on CNN was Gene Simmons making remarks, and he described him in one word, and that was a singularity. And he went on and expounded about that. I'm like, okay, all of a sudden Gene Simmons has got like major respect points just to the fact that he actually recalled on that interview that he took Diana Ross, who he was dating at the same time he was dating Cher, I might add, and they went to see him at the Ritz. I think this might have been the Dirty Mind tour, 81.
That sounds right. Yeah, that sounds right.
And just how incredibly extroverted he could be on stage. But then when he went to meet him backstage, I mean, he was just so awkward and shy and didn't talk much. But the fact that he described him succinctly in one word, and that was like a singularity. He could do it all. And he frequently would give people, you know, I can do everything. So you name a pop star of the day, I can do everything they can do, but they can't do everything I can do. He knew what he was.
Kirk, that's so funny that you say that, and it just made me recall a very fond memory. And I don't know, John, if I shared this with you when I interviewed, or maybe Michael Dean, but you know, when you're on the road, and you know, and this is well before cell phones. I'm dating myself, but we would think of things that we wanted to do to stay occupied, and so we used to play video games, and one of the games we played was a game called Tecmo Bowl, and it's so funny when you look at the graphics now, some of those early video games compared to what we have now. But I remember we were in the room, Gilbert and myself, and we were burning up time and we're playing Tecmo Bowl. And he'd come in and he started watching us, right? And so, you're like, you want to play? Nope. And so the very next day, you guys, he comes back and says, I'm now ready to play. And this guy starts playing the game, and we had been playing this thing for quite some time. And he's given all of us all we can handle. He's beating us in the game less than 24 hours. Now, I don't know if it was Robbie or who it was, but somebody had shared that he sent him out to buy the video game, and he stayed up all night long and played the game until he figured it out. So that's just a little insight on the type of individual he was. I mean, once he was focused on being good at something, he gave it his all to make sure that happened.
I think there's a version of that story in the book, but it's John Madden football, I think was what somebody told me. But yeah, it sounds right, yeah.
So it didn't matter whether it was Techno Bowl or ping pong,
right?
Whatever. Well, certainly.
There's a wonderful story in the book, and I really felt for him. There's an engineer who's worked with Michael Jackson called Eric Static, and clearly very, very talented guy. And he used to be good at ping pong when he was a kid. And he played Prince, and he said that Prince was like competitive, and he was like, you know, if we can speak slightly ill of somebody's not around anymore, you know, and Prince was like, you know, prone to maybe being sneaky while he was playing, you know, surfing, he wasn't looking and so on. And Eric told me that he beat Prince at ping pong, and then he sort of paused and he went, "When did you start working with Prince?" And he was like, "Well, yeah, shortly after that." Clearly, that was a career mistake. They talk about losing to your boss at golf and things like that, and I think maybe that applies here.
Well, and John, it's interesting that you say that, because one of the things that I took away from your manuscript was that you paint a compelling and an intimate portrait of Prince with a lot of details from your interviews and stories that I haven't heard before, and I'm probably sure a lot of other people haven't heard before. So it's really, really a totality of different stories. I mean, some that we've heard before, obviously, because they're intrinsic to Prince's legacy.
Right.
But there's a lot of details, a lot of stories in there that I think are going to be fresh to a lot of people reading the book. And it really, really, it made it very, very well rounded.
Thank you. You can stay. Well, it's your podcast.
But John, I mean, I'm trying to be diplomatic here. You know how, for lack of a better word, scrutinous the Prince fan community can be, especially when I already know this. Prince wouldn't have wanted this. Prince wouldn't have wanted that. This box set sucks. It doesn't have enough track. This book's not telling me anything I don't already know. And to Jay's point, there are fresh stories in there. I mean, there were a couple of things early on in the book I had no clue that a member of Prince's Purple Rain entourage, I think in Sheila E.'s band, had AIDS. So certainly AIDS was part of the fabric of conversation that he eventually turns into the title track of the album, which is absolute genius. I mean, who else was, and you bring up this about Sign of the Times, the title track, that not even guys like Public Enemy were talking about AIDS or the Challenger shuttle explosion or any of this stuff. That this was not what you did in a pop song. You were talking about you love your baby, you love him and leave him and hit the door, that kind of stuff. This was not that. This was a turning point for his adulthood in terms of pop songwriting.
I mean, Hucky can speak to this, I'm sure.
Sure.
But, as he said in the Technoball story, which I think is in the book as a John Madden story, but let's not split hairs. It's fine. I think it's the same principle, is that Prince was a student, Prince, and you can hear that on I Can Never Take the Place of Your Man, where you hear a bit of Santana and you hear the space between the notes, which was a thing that, Miles Davis practiced, which again, there's a little section in the book about that. Prince was a student of fashion. We were talking before we were on air about opera. There was a cutter from the Minnesota Opera House that was very well regarded that went to work in Prince's wardrobe department. So, Prince just was unconventional. He didn't play by the rules. That made him just such a fearsome and fearless performer and entertainer. And, I loved Dave Hampton was interviewed in the book. He also worked with Bill Withers and worked with Joni Mitchell and some great people. And Herbie Hancock as well. And he said to Scotty Baldwin, and some of you might know as well, who was Prince's front house engineer.
Yeah.
And Scotty sort of quoted Dave as saying, the one thing that the music industry really fears is a truly free black man. That seemed to be, if I can speak to that as a white fella, that seemed to be where Prince was at in terms of that freedom that he fought hard to fight for was something that, it scared other people, but it also made him compelling.
And just to take it to the next step, in reading the book, John, you couch and cloak Prince's life and his work with what was happening in society and culture simultaneously. There's a part in the book where you talk about George Michael, you talk about the influence of Michael Jackson, you talk about the advent of hip hop, and fair or unfair, whether Prince was chasing hip hop or he was chasing New Jack Swing. Again, the illustration of his life also talks about the influences that he was obviously surrounded by, as we all are. And, is there really a fair way, that society and culture and life don't influence what you're doing? So, I took that away from the book. It's really, really a very, very detailed description of his life based on also what was happening to him in life.
And Jay, to the point to John's earlier description of Prince in our discussion here, he was a student, but along with being a student, he was a sponge. He could easily and rapidly absorb anything you put in front of him and spit it out maybe with his own twist on it. But he was he could absorb stuff and just retain it in an incredibly fast fashion.
Well, he was a student and a teacher, wasn't he? Because as a band leader.
True. Most certainly.
Yeah, and I know we often talk about this. I mean, I'm hearing you what you're saying, Kirk, about him being a sponge and having this incredible ability to absorb, but also to want to talk about what a talented individual he was. Now, I mean, obviously, we know that he's probably one of the greatest musicians ever, but anything, I mean, like, playing basketball with him, and I'll tell you guys, the only thing in my mind, I played hundreds of basketball games with this guy, that if he would have been a little bit taller, we may not have been talking about Prince the musician. We may be talking about Prince the NBA player, but he was just that good. And so he was so blessed to have this amazing gift of talent, something that I've never seen before.
But it's understanding that, and the book again deals with. I was lucky enough to track down childhood friends who talked about the Prince and Kirk, half brother, Paul Mitchell, who was basically spent every day with him in his teens. And somebody mentioned Paul's name to me when I went to Minneapolis. Said, "You need to speak to Paul Mitchell." I didn't speak to him for about 2 or 3 years, and then just tracked him down just before publication, which was really fortunate for me. But he was telling me that Dwayne, not Kirk, I beg your pardon, Dwayne, not Kirk. He and Dwayne would be dating all the cheerleaders, and Prince didn't get a look in because he was, a foot shorter than them, and they would get that because they were successful at sport, and that gave Prince his drive to be successful at music instead of sport. And I think you're right, Hucky. I think Prince would have been successful at anything he'd put his mind to. If Prince wanted to go into business and make money, I think with his drive, I think he would have been a billionaire, probably.
Conquer sports and music.
Could you imagine that, right?
The Nike. Can you imagine the Nike shoes that would come out for that one?
That would have been.
But he loved sport, didn't he? The book's got a lot of stories about that. He threw a party for the WNBA team in Minnesota that won a title.
Yeah.
And when Brett Favre came and played for the Minnesota team was, hang on, who is it?
Vikings.
The Vikings, I beg your pardon. I'm so sorry.
Not to be confused with the Baltimore Ravens.
Watch your mouth now. He had to go there.
I've wandered into a gunfight with a knife here, haven't I?
Not at all. Not at all.
Not even a knife, like a water pistol. I'm lost. When Brett Favre joined the Vikings, and Prince would go and see their games because he knew how important it was. And the story about Dennis Rodman playing in the Minnesota Timberwolves, I believe, basketball, and Prince did a whole comedy routine about that. Jimmy Jam told me that that lasted about 20 minutes. So he loved, and as you said, he loved ping pong. And that was the one thing about New Girl. I don't know if you've seen the New Girl episode that Prince is in. But I think the one thing that's not true to life about it, when it's fiction, is that he would so easily lose at ping pong, which is the end of the episode. That shows you didn't have final cut over the show, because I think he would have won.
John, did you have a chance to see the re-release of Sign of the Times, the film, in IMAX last month?
That's a great question. Yeah, I saw it twice.
Good for you.
It was, I saw it when it opened on the Friday night, and then I went back on the Monday. And, I was shameless enough to give people flyers for the book when I was there. But, it was good timing. When in Rome, or when in London's IMAX. What an incredible piece of work. And that was part of the reason I wanted to write the book, if I may, is that I didn't see the Sign of the Times tour, but obviously I saw the movie. So what was nice, and I know that you guys had Albert Magnolia on your show a few weeks ago, but I did speak to him at the beginning of it, and I said, Albert, this might be the first interview where nobody asks you about Purple Rain and talks to you about Prince. So, because all I wanted to talk to him about was the Sign of the Times movie. I think it's a masterpiece. I would, being a kind of proud Brit, if the BBC could show that every year, instead of The Wizard of Oz with The Great Escape, I'd be very happy. I think that on telly, public service telly, they should put that on every year, rather. Not every week would be fun, but every year, around Christmas. And just imagine being young and being into music and seeing that for the first time. Wow, right? Wow. And what a trip the whole thing is. It's just, the musicianship, the sense of fun, the sense of play in the sunshine, no pun intended, the cohesiveness of the band. And what's crazy about it is, like, if you said to an artist, do a concert movie, and it's not even his greatest hits. It's I know he does like White Corvette, and I know he does Charlie Parker's Now's the Time, but it's just pretty much sign. So Alan Light did a book about Purple Rain, and I think there's another one that Andrew Svensson's done that's just out. And he talks about, wow, this guy that did this amazing album, and he did this amazing movie in the same year. No, because Sign of the Times commercially was, because we talked about the distribution, maybe it wasn't as widespread as it could have been. in the ether. For me, if you're going to celebrate Prince, for me, it's kind of like, well, what about that year that Paisley Park opened? He finished the year on a benefit gig with Miles Davis. He worked with Bonnie Raitt and George Clinton at Paisley Park. Released Sign of the Times, that released it into the world. Put the movie out. He made the Black Album and pulled it. He started doing Love Sexy. What about that? And I know that if I call it a purple patch, fans are going to say no, it was a peach and black patch, but you know what I mean. It was a real rich vein of form. And for me, if you accept, and I imagine you guys do accept it because you're on a podcast devoted to Prince, if you accept that Prince was the best who ever did it in terms of pop music, and probably the only person in pop music where you could compare it to Mozart and people wouldn't laugh at you. If you accept that he's the best that's ever done it, like Sign of the Times for me is like that's the mountaintop.
Mm-hmm.
And
I have to agree.
Me too. Absolutely.
The most fertile period of his career was that 85, 86, 87, 88. Just
and the book goes into that. Less 88, the book goes into 85, 86, 87 in quite a lot of detail.
Yeah, it's really, and honestly, for folks who are like, I don't know, do I need another book about Sign of the Times because Dwayne Tootle? This is an excellent, because Dwayne's focus is mainly the recording sessions, and it's a great book. He's a lovely guy to talk to. And he's going to come on the show, but actually he's going to do something not Prince related. So that's
cool.
Stay tuned. I'll tell you about it off air. Because he's like me, he's from Maryland, a Baltimore guy. So I say it the correct way. Baltimore. No, we don't say no T in Baltimore, Maryland. So, but
lost. Is it American football again?
No, it's the accent in Baltimore, Maryland. There's an accent, John. It's real bad, man. Water. Let's go get some water ice down the street. That's like Italian ice. Yeah, yeah. Everybody's got their brogue or their accent and stuff like that, and I'm giving you a little slice of Baltimore culture there. So thank you.
The Wire.
Oh, I could tell you, I have friends who are on season 2. We could talk about that. We could talk about that. The Wire. I'll know The Wire. So I actually lived near season 2 where the Dundalk Seagull terminals were while it was being filmed. Anyway, we could talk about that another time. But Dwayne's book focuses a lot on the recording sessions. That there's a certain narrative bent there. And yes, he does have personal interviews and stuff like that. But your book is a more fleshed out version of that component of his book. And that's the human story, the connective tissue of all the different circumstances going on around. It makes an excellent companion to Dwayne's.
I'm very honored to be ranked alongside it. To be honest, when I started writing the book, as you know, it took a while. And I think it was just before the Purple Rain book came out. And somebody went, oh, someone's already writing the book about Sign of the Times. And I think I'd just caught wind or I'd seen the Purple Rain book.
Yeah.
I kind of relaxed because I was like, that's okay. Because of the Sign of the Times parade book is like the Purple Rain book that Dwayne did, which is also excellent.
Yeah.
I know tonally and in terms of content, it's going to be very different from what I had in mind. And, Prince is, no pun intended, big enough, rich enough, deep enough that, there's different voices can be heard in Prince. We all know that Hucky's book is going to blow us all away. So,
I don't know about that. If Hucky's book ever
we're
gets
just
out.
waiting for that.
John, I'm curious. Tell us some of, can you give us an idea of what have the early responses of the book been like?
There's only one Amazon review. There was one music review where, which I think, okay, I've been told not to be self-deprecating. One Amazon review has been a rave, which is lovely. So, if you do want to review it on Amazon, don't let me stop you. If you enjoyed it, please do Amazon reviews, please. Apparently it helps with sales. But I think the Prince community has been very warm in London in terms of the way it's received it. I think people are big on intent, and I think we talked about it earlier. I was a little worried because Prince is the kind of character where everyone's got a different opinion about him. Everyone's very protective of him. So when I said that I wanted to write about Prince in the context of Sly Stone, I wanted to write about Prince in the context of Michael Jackson, in the context of Madonna, in the context of James Brown, Carlos Santana. We could go on. So I understand those artists as well. There's a lot of Prince fans, but I don't want to talk about them. So I compare Prince with Madonna and I compare Prince with Michael Jackson in the first chapter. And there'd be some people that would say, no pun intended, nothing compares to Prince. He's in that category of one. How dare you even mention Madonna in the same sentence as him? How dare you even mention? But I think sometimes it's useful to say, well, this is where Madonna really scored in the 80s. This is where she did really well. This is what she was good at. And then this is what Prince was good at. I'm not saying that one's better than the other, but just, comparing characters or even something like where hip hop comes along and you would think that Prince was technologically savvy, so, could handle samples. You would think it was a form of music that he would just adapt to, and he was up in the latest sounds. I don't think it's a secret to say that he maybe struggled, or it took him a while to get his head around what hip hop was and what it represented. But by the end, he was playing with Kendrick Lamar, and he was playing a lot with Q-Tip on stage, and so on. So he's, Prince adapted, as we know.
I always argue that he was doing hip hop and rap long before anybody gave him credit for it. Irresistible Bitch. He does a little rap in Girls and Boys. So I think he was comfortable maybe in his own way doing it. But to your point about, I always looked at Madonna and following more Michael Jackson's template in that she would be working with the it producers and songwriters and collaborators of the day, much like Michael did, eventually working with Jam and Lewis or Dallas Austin or any of these folks. And Madonna, she had Babyface, she'd worked Stuart Price, all the, William Orbit, certainly. Ray of Light's probably the best thing she put out since Like a Prayer, personally for me.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
But she knew how to collaborate. And let's not forget, David Bowie was the one who's doing that before any of them.
Yeah.
And that's actually the point, Kurt, that I was going to make, because there's several references to Bowie in your book, John. And and really, how do you tell the story without bringing up Bowie and Prince, not necessarily as a comparison, but just, two very, very, sometimes avant-garde, sometimes very visual, sometimes very eccentric artists. So there's got to be always at least a discussion. And then, of course, there's, you go into detail about the story about Cat Glover going to work with Prince versus going to work with David Bowie when she was offered the Sign of the Times tour. So, a lot of times there's this overlap where you can't separate the fabric between other artists and Prince.
Yeah, and I think some Prince fans are very protective of him and say, that he's in a category of one, there's no one like him. And that's true. But I think, to understand, Prince admitted his debt to other artists. You can't, he had, Shaka Khan was deep in his soul. Joni Mitchell was deep in his soul. The great singer, especially female ones. I go into detail on that in terms of the book, in terms of the fact that he loved the female voice, and you see that with his bands as well. You see that. And that's what's interesting, Sign of the Times, Rosie Bonnie Boyer being the first powerhouse vocalist.
Right.
And then, subsequently you hear Rosie Gaines, you hear Shelby J, you hear Liv Warfield, Elisa Fiorillo, that was three powerhouses in one band.
I know.
Yeah. So he loved the female voice, and he worked with Beverly Knight, who was lucky enough that she graced my book launch, which was a real honor for me. And she's a wonderful, wonderful singer. And he loved Judith Hill, as we know. So there's loads of people that it's interesting that, again, probably partly to do with the fact he didn't have a high opinion of his own voice. If you talk to people that were around when he was a child, or the fact that he would record vocals on his own, that he loved that. He loved the female voice and what it represented for him. I don't think that answers your question. I think I went off at a tangent there.
I loved it.
No,
I love it. I was going to mention Angie Stone's name in there too. You make the one of the most underrated songs he ever put out. You make my sunshine, man. Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he loved that. He loved that. He loved that voice. I mean, there were male vocalists he loved too, but just not as many. I think. But he loved Dolly Parton, and he loved Chrissie Hynde as well. And I stuck that in the book because I just thought, if you're Chrissie Hynde and you read that and it makes you smile, then cool,
and have at it, right?
Yeah, that's anyone that you liked. I tried to put in the book just to, so that even if nobody else likes the book, they do, because it gives them a nice mention to go, hey, it's like it.
John, there's one thing I wanted to bring up, because we're talking about Prince and being, sometimes in a class of his own and being just this singular talent. There's a quote in the book from Miles Davis's son, Aaron, and I quote. He says, "There's always going to be someone trying to be like Prince in some way. That's his legacy." And when I read that, I said, absolutely. And it's been that way, I think, since he was Prince, and so it really, really resonated with me. And can you talk a little bit about that and your thoughts on that?
Yeah, of course. Well, we talked about hip hop earlier, didn't we? And a friend of mine, Nick Raphael, is also quoted in the book. He says, Outkast, there's no Outkast without Prince. If you listen to Outkast, you can hear Prince all the way through them. And Jam and Lewis Success, when I interviewed Jimmy Jam, he said that he and Terry, if I can call him Terry, I'm not really on Terry terms with him, but I'm going to call him that. He and Terry, when they're programming anything, what would Prince do? What would it sound like? You can't, like The Weeknd and Bruno Mars,
Frank Ocean.
I don't think it's going to be a statement of the century to say that those gentlemen are familiar with his work, but I'm not saying they're ripping it off. I think what's interesting to me as well is the broader lens that you look at Prince at. So someone like, say, Taylor Swift being, a billionaire only through music, basically fighting hard to reclaim her masters. You would imagine that Prince would be, if he was around today, would be aware of that and be impressed by that. There's a singer here, a wonderful singer here called Ray, who was with a label called Polydor and basically did a public tweet, slamming them, left the label. Subsequently has won 8 Brits. Subsequently is forging her own path, her own career. She sang at the Academy Awards this year. I'd be amazed if Prince wasn't a big fan of hers if he was around today. I mean, we can only speculate, but I think it's, and Prince surprised you. Prince liked the Cocteau Twins. Prince liked Danny DeFranco, who's interviewed in the book. It's like Prince didn't really see genre. And, when you talk about genre, and I'm going off into tangent here, but one of the things I value about Prince is some of his best songs are genreless. That the genre is Prince. So, like just to take a couple of examples, Purple Rain, is it a blues song? Is it a country song?
Right.
Is it a torch song? Pop song? Well, it's Prince, it's Purple Rain. And then you go to Sign of the Times and, the lyrics are blues, right? The lyrics are blues meet hip hop. The sound sonically is maybe funk, but is it pop music as well? And then what's interesting about Sign of the Times for me is that one of the things I wanted to do in the book is speak to people who had covered some of those songs and say, what did you find in them? What did you excavate in those songs? And that's not always in the book. One of the things that, I tried really hard to get Jim Kerr as a singer with Simple Minds. He wanted to do it and then it didn't happen in the end. But Simple Minds covered 2 songs from the album, The Cross, but Simple Minds also covered Sign of the Times. Stadium Rock Band UK covered Sign of the Times.
I know.
Shaka Khan covered Sign of the Times. Nina Simone Sign of the Times. Robert Glasper covered Sign of the Times. Billy Cobham, I think, covered Sign of the Times.
He did.
This is a broad sweep of artists who have all found something different in that song. And that to me is fascinaning.
I'd like to add Heaven 17 also covered Sign of the Times. And if you haven't
they?
heard it,
Well,
really cool cover. There's an album that was on Cleopatra Records and a whole bunch of people. The guy from Dead or Alive does a version of one of his songs, and it's really cool. I think it's streaming.
But Kurt, I'm not personal friends with Martin Ware from 17, so I don't have that in. I can't compete.
Whatever.
That in, right?
No.
Yeah, I just kicked it over to you.
Sorry.
I'm just listening. I know what you guys have.
You're not asleep yet, Hucky.
No, I'm not sleeping. I did that earlier. I did my old man nap earlier.
Well,
plans to write more books? John, do you have any plans to write more books rather than Prince?
I'd love to. I mean, I always think the quickest way for something not to happen is to talk about it. So I could tell you about books that I'd like to write, and then that means they're guaranteed not to happen. Maybe I'll talk about them off air. So I don't want to be held to something. But writing this gave me the idea for about 10 other books, seriously. And then I thought maybe I'd better finish the Prince one first. It's difficult because you set a high bar when you write about Prince because women find him devastatingly attractive. Men are into the guitar playing, like he danced in heels. He's fascinating. And he was a master of his own myth and the mystery around that. So anyone that I write about after this, I've got to try and make sure that they're interesting too.
Well, when that happens, we will be happy to have you back on.
Absolutely.
Of course, to promote your work. This has been our absolute pleasure. I want to thank you for your time. I'm going to kick it over to my brother, Kurt.
Yes, sir. John, this has been a sheer delight. I mean, from the get when we were talking before we hit record, just the rapport and the job that you've done with this book, congratulations on that first and foremost of, gestating a 5-year-old baby, getting it to gestate and finally birth it. You should probably write, there you go. For those who can't see, he's cradling his book like a baby. So for those listening to the podcast, check that out visually. But I have to say, this has just been a sheer delight. And thank you for accommodating us with all our different schedules. And we've been trying to put this on the books for a while now. This has been worth the wait. Simply put, just been worth the wait.
3 of you. You're very impressive. And Hucky, thank you again for speaking to me for the book. And well done in this podcast for not saying the best bits in the book are me talking, because you could have done that and you didn't. So thank you.
But seriously, thank you for coming on here, folks. We'll have links below where you can purchase the book. You can certainly purchase it on Amazon. I did have a question though. Is there any thought to having this in audiobook format at all at some point?
I would love to do that. I spoke to the publishers about it. I mean, I'd really love it to be published in the States, and obviously
Yeah.
there's that would be the dream. Poland apparently are going to publish it. I didn't know Prince are big fans of Poland, but we'll see. I think the better it's received, the more nice Amazon reviews there are, the more likely it is to get wider distribution. So any assistance. But I think that there is a book on Prince here that's different from all the others. I feel kind of comfortable in saying that. And so I really hope that fans enjoy it because I wrote it for you. I wrote it for fans.
Excellent. So, folks, we'll go to the description and the links below. We'll have where you can purchase the book and what have you. It is worth a read. I'm still finishing it up myself, but I can tell you, even just from the first few chapters, there's a lot of stuff in there that even the most diehard fans are gonna go, oh, I didn't know that. So please check out the book. Support reading. Let's just start from there. Maybe tune out from social media. I think all of us could agree that that's definitely a place where we can find refuge away from the world of social media is reading a book. It's a great art to form. It's a way of forgetting about your troubles of the day or what have you. Read a book. But I would like to say again, thank you for spending this time with us, sitting down with us and chatting and amidst all the different time zones and what have you that we have here. We'll definitely have you on any other projects you have come on. And as I always like to say when we end each episode, a rising tide lifts all boats. Hucky?
John, I want to go ahead and say the same thing that my guys have said. We really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to spend a little bit of that with us. And so big thanks to you. And for me personally, it's such an amazing feeling when, John, people like you and Dwayne, you guys write these books, and for us that we're actually there inside that circle, it's helpful because, as we get older, our memories are not as good. And so I got to tell you, like when I'm looking at your book and stuff like that, and Dwayne's as well, it brings back some really wonderful, fond memories. And so I want to thank you personally for that and the work that you guys are doing. The thing that I always say at the end is, we got a lot going on in the world today. I think that all of us would agree with that. And so let's work on being kind to one another. Jay.
Yes. Well, again, I'm going to echo my brothers also. John McKie, thank you very much. Please go out. Do yourselves a favor, ladies and gentlemen. Buy Prince, A Sign of the Times. It's a fascinating read. And even for the non-diehard Prince fan, there's a lot of great material in there. You're going to thoroughly enjoy it. I do want to give two special acknowledgements before we close. One is going to be to Haley Drinkle, who is a friend of the podcast who actually put us in touch with John. So we're very grateful to Haley. And I know we'll be seeing her again. And also to Ben Pester, who has been answering a ton of emails from me and having some great conversations with me and John to coordinate and help coordinate us getting an advance copy of the book and also with the scheduling. So Ben, we're very grateful to him as well. And ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you see and heard, please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the Electric Vibe podcast. Any interaction that we're grateful to receive helps us to continue to bring great content and great guests like John McKie. So please continue to support us in that vein. And the way I like to close every show is with this thought. When the universe comes knocking, you have to answer that door.
Peace.